I guess. I do the same thing.
Okay, welcome everyone. Thank you. One last thing, if you haven't checked in, please do, just so that we have a count of how many people who have signed up. Back with Delaney and Jack. If not, welcome to Food and Faith. I'm so happy to see everyone here who has signed up actually came, and like we met our limit and our goal, so I'm really happy about that. Background about Food and Faith, it was literally one of the first events that Calvin Interfaith Alliance has held since even before the org was even made. And this is the first time we're doing this event since COVID. So last time we did this when I was a freshman, so that was like 3 years ago when I was an intern. So I'm really happy that we're all here together, mask free, still COVID-ish, but like we're getting there, right? And I'm just really happy to see all of you guys here. So what's gonna happen first is we're gonna get food because I know everyone's really hungry and we can all smell it, so that's okay. But before we do that, Austin wants to say a few things.
All right, so first and foremost, just to let everybody know, when we do get to the questions portion of the conversation, we will be recording. We are currently recording, and that's because we've had a few requests. We also will request that we go up in an orderly fashion. So if we could start with this table here and kind of go in a circle, that would be good. You will get food, and then we will start with a conversation with Fred, and then is that okay? Or
Yeah.
we'll have Fred from the Hindu temple, Imam Kip from At Tawhid, and then we'll have Hung Soo from the Buddhist temple.
We should have introduced ourselves. That's kind of low, but it's okay. My name is Orla Saleh. I'm one of the co-directors here at Calvin Interfaith Alliance. I have been doing this now for 3 years. I am a religious minority. I am a Muslim, and I'm really happy that I'm here and able to implement like diversity and learning.
I'm Austin. I am the other co-director of the Interfaith Alliance. I started 3 years ago as well. And I'm a Christian student, but I arrived here as an agnostic.
So one more announcement, which we're going to give it to our intern, Erin. She did so well, you guys, like, wow.
Hi, so my name is Erin. So I'm going to give you a little information about the food. It came from Curry Leaf on 44th Street, which is really good. And then the first 3 tins are all gluten-free and vegan options. The rest is going to be just normal food. And then any of the vegans or gluten-free people, if you're just unsure about cross-contamination, we do have packaged snacks by the water bottles. If you want to, you can take some of those. You can read the ingredients, whatever is most comfortable. And then with that, we will ask that the gluten-free and vegan people can go up first, so you can help yourselves first, and then the speakers will go up as well.
and then we'll call you off by table as well. Okay? So people who are gluten-free and vegan can go up first. No shame.
I don't have to.
Like, it's okay. I also have restrictions, guys. It's okay. And the speakers, you
Yes, it's the only self.
Trying to figure things out, toss things out. I try to do things So that's like almost like the Hail Mary a little bit. And then Minnesota, that's the
Not quite sure when. I don't think there's that many today. It might not even be a. I love South No, I knew there was old, but that's. Oh, yeah. No. Nothing's changed, the menu's the same. I love it. The layout was. And you know it's a big theater. Yeah, we give them firemen and students. Yep. Kip is my brother's name. I'm curious, growing up, did people think that it was like a nickname as opposed to a name or not? So it is so. What is it? Really? Because my half brother's name is just Kip. That sounds like it would hurt.
It means somebody who lives in the country. My family something I did was in Virginia. They maybe within the mountain years, so I said, okay, well, it's fitting.
So, Kip is the mountain part, or Kip is the middle part? I'm not certain. Okay. What is your last name? What is it? So you're supposed to live for many generations.
Every time we
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, everybody and I have a complicated relationship, but if it's done right, and that is one of the ways that I will. Yeah. Really? We have the students. What is I was given a nice coffee cup. I got one.
I just finished one today. And I don't know, like 2 minutes later.
Okay, so how do you go from coffee?
I get these from Shenan, but I was born here.
So her, there is still.
When you graduate.
She still works. So, because I actually just took
Oh, really? As a doctor? Where are you going for your, well, because somebody told me that she was. I mean, I know it's rigid, but.
Thank you. I heard my name.
That girl loss tends to attract more parents and Britain attracts more people. I just, okay, I thought that was true. Why? Because, well, the mom. Yeah. And I mean, it used to be the only house and everybody could go there, but I think that once he's honest, it's the same thing. Like back in the old days, yeah. Exactly.
Well, you know, I started giving her Friday sermons. The president said,
Sorry. It's not your fault, but I'm with you. I know I
Yeah, that was, yeah. I believe they sold it for their movie. Yeah. And Mary did that in Latin and German. It's kind of cool. Our Lady of Charles has a fairly Italian, albeit Italian. Really? And these people do not live in that neighborhood. Very the town around the church. But nowadays, it's even I live by St. Augustine, and most people know that live in St. Oh, is that right? Yeah. Very few people in the neighborhood. No kidding. I go there with a fish fry and we listen to jazz. And like they had a clothing line the Basilica. It still is, not the food like Right. No, I'll tell you what. I believe I'm correct here. Midnight Mass. That's a great thing. 11:30 midnight. They were also being told it, Carolina, England. But that neighborhood around here is still sustaining.
Oh, hey.
Are you tired?
Okay, okay.
So where's the parish you I was reading. So right back to the morning. I had to go to public school for 1 year, my entire education, kindergarten to college. Because we moved to a new neighborhood. In the 8th grade was public. So in 8th grade, they're public. Shocked by the discipline. All Catholic except grade. Sure. I in my new math class, and the teacher, he had everybody from 7th grade. So, and I said the name of my church, church and school, and as the words were leaving my lips, I heard that name through everybody else's ears, the name of my precious as soon as it left my lips, this boy is the best Jesus. You grew up with it.
Context.
Yeah. I remember Sacred Heart, statues of several people were because of someone he
Okay, everyone, we're gonna get started. Okay. Okay, I'm gonna give it off to Anwesha. Here we go. Hello, everybody. I'm Anwesha Pradhanango. I'm the General Secretary Intern for Cloud and Interface. Our first speaker for today is Mr. Fred Stella. He obtained his degree in Communication and Mass Media from the University of Detroit. His interest in Hinduism began at age 15 when studying comparative religions. Over the years, Fred has spent time expanding his knowledge with studying and practice in various ashrams and temples in the US and India. In 2009, the West Michigan Temple ordained him as Pracharak, or outreach minister. Fred has been serving as the president of Interfaith Dialogue for the past 25 years. And he also hosts a program called Common Threads, which is also available as podcasts. Thank you so much for joining us today.
I'm not really done here. You get one of these done? Okay, all right. Hi there. Namaste. Nice to be here. I think we should do this every week, really. So I know that the focus here is on food. And I'm very happy to talk about food. Think about food. Dream about food. I like my food. But to talk about food in the context of religion, I think you need to know a little bit of background about the religion itself for everything else to make sense. So I'm called to speak on panels and, for instance, health or death and dying, or social issues and things like that. And little high, okay, thank you. All right.
And so, again, whenever I talk about those things, it's hard to sort of jump in the middle, if you will, and say, well, Hinduism teaches X, Y, Z about this. So, but if you don't know about A, B, C, D, E, and F, then X, Y, Z doesn't quite make as much sense. So let me start at the very beginning here, talking about the core beliefs and practices within Hinduism. And then when we talk about food, it'll make a little bit more sense. So Hinduism, if you've never taken a comparative religions class, is considered to be the oldest of the major religions. And in terms of when Hinduism started, that is greatly under debate. Some people say as far as 5,000 years back, and there are even some people that say it could be closer to 10,000. One of the reasons we don't know is because Hinduism doesn't have two things that probably every religion here represented does have. And those are, number one, a founding story and a founder. So for instance, if I was to ask a Jew, how old is your religion, or when did your religion start? That person might not be able to give me an exact date, but they could say something like the covenant with Abraham, or the delivery of the Ten Commandments to Moses, all right, the institution of Mosaic law, something like that. There might be a bit of a debate as to, do we use this story, do we use that story as the actual foundation? But still, they're close enough together. Obviously, if I was to ask you when Christianity started, somebody might say, well, Christmas, or the beginning of Jesus' ministry, or Pentecost, it's all around the same time. Islam, of course, with Muhammad. And we have nothing like that. We don't have a real story, and there is not one single founder. What we do know is that what is called Hinduism today evolved out of very primitive, animist, polytheist religions from the area that is now known today as India. And as that series of beliefs and practices evolved, at some point, it started to resemble something like what we call Hinduism today. Hinduism is much more an umbrella of multiple belief systems and practices than just a religion. It is the farthest thing from monolithic you could ever ask for. The good news is that with very, very few exceptions, all of these different expressions of the Hindu Dharma coexisted really, really well with not just a tolerance, but an acceptance that different people with different temperaments are attracted to or resonate with different belief systems, different spiritual practices, etc., etc. And that is true today. Hinduism is expressed in such a variety. There are certain common denominators that I would say most, if not all, Hindus would share. For instance, the understanding that there is a divine power, a singular divine power, which we in English would call God with a capital G. We refer to that essence as Brahman, and that we are all a part of Brahman. The most important distinction, I think, between the dharmic faiths, and when I say the dharmic faiths, I mean the religions of the East, and the Abrahamic religions, is the understanding of our relationship with God. In the Judeo-Christian and Muslim traditions, there is most, I would say, significant consensus, with exceptions, that God created the universe. God and the universe are separate entities. There is a relationship between the universe and God, since the universe is a creation of God, but nonetheless, they are separate. In Hinduism, the difference would be that even though we often use the word create or creation, creator, we use those words, but a more specific term would be manifestation, that this universe is a manifestation of divinity, not a separate creation. That we, meaning the universe and all sentient beings in this universe, are part and parcel, that the soul, which we call Atman, is a part of God. So there is no separation between divinity and divinity's manifestation, even though divinity's manifestation oftentimes looks like the exact opposite of what you might think divinity to be. And we can get into that later. We understand that at face value, that can seem like a contradiction. But nonetheless, that is a long-held Hindu belief. There are some Hindus who have an understanding of our relationship with God, that is actually closer to the Abrahamics, that there is more of a divine. But that simply speaks to Hinduism's tolerance for a variety of points of view. So Hinduism, when you think of Hinduism, you normally think of what country? I just mentioned it a couple minutes ago. So I mentioned India, right? When you think of Hinduism, you think of India. When you think of other religions, you don't really think about another country as much. With Judaism, of course, you think of Israel, but then again, there are more Jews in New York than there are in Israel. And the Jews who make up the population of Israel come from everywhere in the world, including India, right? So ethnically, Israel is much more diverse than people often give it credit for. So you have Jews from other areas of the Middle East, Jews from India, Jews from China, Jews from South America, and of course here in the United States. And obviously, a lot of people think Middle East when they think of Islam, but I think my colleague Kip here will dissuade you of that persuasion. There are actually more Muslims in India than any other place other than Indonesia. So and of course Christians, right? You know, you don't think of a particular country when you think of Christianity, because you know how universal it is. So I am not of Indian descent. Spoiler alert, right? Yeah, you don't run into a lot of Hindus named Fred. As a matter of fact, if ever you do, I'd be very suspicious. Statistically speaking, I should not be here. Right? When you think of all of the Hindus who reside in Grand Rapids, the fact that an Italian American is speaking to you and representing the temple, then that shouldn't happen. But lo and behold, it did. Don't ask me why. So the question is, why is Hinduism so connected with one country? There are other countries that have significant Hindu populations, such as Nepal, the island nation of Mauritius off the coast of Africa, the Caribbean. A lot of people don't think about Hinduism when they think of the Caribbean nations, but because of the British tradition of indentured servitude, which is just a half a rung up from slavery, there were many people from India who came to work on the sugar plantations in places like Trinidad and Guyana, etc., Jamaica. So there are two reasons why that you don't find, or rather, you'll find Hindus all over the world, but they tend to be Indian in ethnicity, right? It could be their great-great-great-great-grandparents who came over from India, but they're still ethnically Indian. So why is it that you only think of India? The first reason is that there was no ambition for extended empire outside of ancient India. There were empires within India, but they didn't have an ambition to go beyond that. So they never thought of, say, conquering or inhabiting Central Asia or Europe or beyond. Number two, there is nothing remotely similar to what you would call, those of you who are Christians, the Great Commission. The idea of going forth unto all nations and making disciples. Nothing like that. Hinduism was, India, and the majority Hindu culture, was very happy with people coming into the country and practicing their own religions, and they were, again, not just tolerated, but accepted. That was just fine. So because they did not send their armies to the far-flung corners of the world, and because there was no directive to bring people into the fold, you could join if you want, but there was no active conversion process. As a matter of fact, there still is no one official way to become a Hindu. You know, people come to the temple, they ask, well, if I want to become a Hindu, what do? I go, start tithing. And I promise you, you'll be a Hindu right away. That's all it takes. So, so that's why it is so focused on that when you think of Hindu, you think of Indian. Even the word Hindu, for the longest time, it actually, and still to some degree does, it indicates not only your religion, but also your ethnicity. So for instance, in the early part of the 19th century, 20th century, late 19th, early 20th, if a Muslim came over from India to the United States, he or she would be called a Hindu. All right. Of course, they're still Muslim, but ethnically, they're still Hindu. And so a lot of people assumed that you had to be Indian to be Hindu, but that's not the case. I've lectured all over the nation. I've lectured in India, in the Caribbean. I've been in Hindu communities all over the place, and no one has ever said, what's this gringo doing being a Hindu? No, it's I don't get that at all. No, not a bit. The only thing that kind of bugs me about my Indian co-religionists is that whenever there is an event where there is food, they always are worried that it's too hot for me. And it is not. I will say I was very pleasantly surprised. I've been involved with the temple for so long. When it was announced that we were going to go up for food, and then she said, please do so in an orderly fashion. I go, how I miss that. We don't do that at the Hindu temple. No. Lines for food are very chaotic. Okay, so now let's talk about food, because now that you know this background, some of this will make more sense to you. Okay. Food is extremely important in Hinduism, because remember what I said, that everything is a part of God, not just a creation of God, but a part of God. So food is also a part of God. And we use it ceremoniously as part of our rituals. We use it obviously in fellowship, and we also don't use it when we fast. So if you're going to feast, chances are you're also going to fast, and we fast, as do all of the major religions have some element of fasting. Admittedly, that's not my strongest point in practicing Hinduism, but I give it my very best. So in our rituals, which we call pujas, the priest will take some form of food and offer it at the altar. Very similar to not just Christian communion in general, but I would say Catholic and Orthodox communion in particular. But there is a difference, because when you take communion at say a Catholic church, it's not just a lovely little ceremony. It's not just a little act of devotion. You are publicly committing that you are in communion with the Catholic Church, that you are a Catholic in good standing. And people who are not Catholics in good standing should not receive Holy Communion or the Eucharist. In Hinduism, believe me, if you all showed up for a ceremony tonight, the priest would offer all of you food, because it's not a theological commitment, as is the Eucharist. It is to a Hindu, that food is holy. Now, essentially, all food is holy, right? I mean, an apple that is blessed by a priest, technically, since if I have two apples, this is blessed by a priest, this is not. Yes, but both are, in essence, a part of the divine. But this apple, going through the act of a blessing, it might make us pay more attention to the apple we eat afterwards that is not blessed. And we should see all of the food we consume as being sacred. And this food can be anything. As I mentioned apple. You could get an apple, you could get a handful of nuts, you could get a little bit of rock candy. It varies. It's not like bread and wine, where communion is always bread and wine. No, it could be anything. And it should be taken, of course, in the spirit of reverence. It doesn't have to be taken in the temple. You could take it home and eat it at your convenience. So the important thing that it is that you take it with reverence, you take it with humility, and you share it as well. You can share this food. So I would say that is the most important element of food. There are other aspects, including, as I say, fasting. But I believe I will relinquish the microphone right now, and we will continue to another part of our evening. And I believe seconds are on the way. So I will let somebody else who knows more about these things than I do take over. I believe that would be you, young lady.
Yes. Brett is right. Seconds are open. So people who want seconds, feel free to get up and grab some seconds. If not, like after 5 minutes, we're gonna start for our second speaker, Imam Kip. Bathrooms are right behind the wall if you need them. Seconds are over there. And also, over there in that table, if you guys do pass by it, it's a table of like all the religious items that Islam, Hinduism, and Buddhism use. Feel free to look at it.
Some of the items.
Seeing the items, yeah, no touching, you guys.
Not all, some.
But feel free to grab some seconds, so go ahead.
Oh, that was it, wasn't it? Oh, thank you.
No, you should put it as. What's that?
I was wondering if you saw it, my
I did. Wait, did you do it twice? I didn't. Did you do this? I missed the first one.
Trash cans are right there.
How did you react to your conversion?
They were surprised, didn't see it coming, thought it was strange, but we're not past it. And that was in the picture, right? Then over time, I think they, especially my mother, she likes me much more as a Muslim. She did. A lot of things changed. She's even joked. I have younger brothers who are in high school now. She said, "Why don't you give them the conversion to Islam so they start giving me a hard time?"
Very good.
How about you?
I was raised as a Catholic, but my father had died before. So my mother was very happy. I explained to her what good and what wasn't, and she was very happy. And now she's still alive. She's very old, but she's still alive. And she is content. She came out of ordination.
I found in my experience, some people that convert to Islam, Catholic families is a lot of times some of the artists, because usually most people have like all the time to include between
That's true because, well, according to the Pope, once you're a Catholic, you're always no matter what.
No, good, yes, because they're not Indian. But this is a bit on the spicy side.
We expected if you wanted it. I grew up in Mexico, but then Korea. They have food that's so spicy. Is that right? Oh, good.
I mean, I've been to Korean restaurants. I don't remember being like overwhelmed by it.
But you really want I used to buy a bottle of aloe drink, aloe. And I'd like to use
I will try that, but it's Lunatic Street.
It's a very, very tiny little place. But the food is well done.
I will go there.
I like something too much. I bought myself
My wife, she's Pakistan, so she knows restaurants in the area. You have to try No, gulab jamun.
Yeah.
It's like a donut soaked in sugar syrup.
It's kind of like a rose. No, but it's similar.
Then there'll be questions and answers after that. We won't be up.
I know it, but I. No, I think all Asian. It's really good, but I love this food.
Okay, everyone, we're gonna get started for our second speaker, and I'm gonna give it to our intern, Jack.
I've been asked to introduce Imam Kip. Hold up. So Imam Kip was born in Columbia, Missouri, and his first introduction to Islam was in grade school through a friend from Afghanistan. This friendship had a lasting impact on him, even eventually leading to accepting Islam at the age of 24. Afterwards, he studied Arabic and Islamic studies at Cambridge Islamic College and Qasid Institute in Amman, Jordan, as well as traditional learning in a variety of Islamic subjects from scholars in the US, Jordan, and Egypt. Previously, he served as the Imam of the Islamic Center of Morgantown in Morgantown, West Virginia. And now he is here in Grand Rapids with us at
Masjid al-Tawheed. Don't worry.
That's how it is. And he's here to share with us today.
Thank you. So first of all, thank you for having us all here and get together over food. Food is always the best thing to bring people together. That's probably why it serves such an important role in religious context too, because religion is a lot about community. I'll follow Fred's lead and first talk a little bit about Islam itself, but just very briefly. I always find that the best way to try to explain to people the gist of what Islam is about is to start with what people are familiar with. So everyone here should be familiar with the basic beliefs of Judaism and Christianity, right? The idea that the world is created by a divine creator and that the human being is kind of a special creation amongst the creatures of the earth, that he has moral responsibility, right? That he's accountable for his or her actions, and that God sends prophets, special people chosen by God to teach people how to live a moral life in this world, and then that eventually there's an accountability for the way that we live in this life after death. So those are the basic tenets of belief that are there in all the Abrahamic faiths. Where Islam differs with Judaism and Christianity, or the main place where it differs with Judaism is about who exactly are prophets sent by God. So Judaism doesn't accept Jesus as a prophet and doesn't accept the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, as a prophet. Whereas in Islam, we affirm that both of those people were prophets sent by God, in addition to the prophets of the Old Testament, like Abraham and Moses and the children of Abraham, Isaac, Ishmael, And then where Islam differs with Christianity, of course, is about the divinity of Jesus. In the Islamic tradition, Jesus is a prophet and a great example to follow, but not divine. So the other thing to know about Islam that's relevant to when we talk about food is that similar to Judaism, not so much and similar with later Christianity, is that it's a religion that has a law, right? A religious law. Certain practices that we follow, not just in our acts of quote unquote worship, because really for us, worship is everything that you do in your life when you're doing it, making your life as a part of having a relationship with God. But things like praying and fasting and going to services is a certain kind of worship. Then everything else in your life is also considered worship for us. And so there's rules about how you live in your life, from every aspect of your life. From the way that we deal with money, what type of transactions are allowed. For example, usurious transactions, transactions that involve interest dealings are not allowed in Islam. How we marry, right? Who it's allowed for you to marry, how we dress, what part of your body you have to cover with your clothing when you're in public. All of these things, we have rules taught to us by the prophets about how we live those parts of our lives, and following those rules is a part of our worship of God. And I always bring the example that it's about having a combination between spirit and form, right? So really, if you follow all of the rules, but there's no heart behind it, that it's not about trying to draw close to God and achieve the pleasure of God and to progress in your relationship with God, then following the rules doesn't mean anything. But at the same time, that discipline is needed there for the spirituality itself as well. So it's a spiritual inward practice of the heart, but you need an outward discipline of practices by which you achieve that inward spirituality. So part of the area that we have rules about is about food. Right? And now, of course, food is not important in the religion only from the standpoint of the rules about what you can eat and what you can't eat. Just like as Fred said, in Hinduism, food is important because of the idea of communion, coming together to share food with each other, feeding the hungry. There's a very strong tradition in Islam of feeding the hungry, and there's certain sins that if you commit, then the way to expiate that sin is to feed poor people. We have practices of sacrifice, to sacrifice a goat or a lamb or a camel, if you can find one in Grand Rapids, and then to distribute the meat to poor people. And then also we have fasting as well. We're only a week away from the month of Ramadan, where we fast from the dawn until sunset, not eating any food or drinking any water for those 29 or 30 days. But then we also have dietary restrictions, certain rules about what we can eat and what we can't eat. And so the question could come, well, why do you eat these things and not these things? It was interesting, I think maybe you saw we had a question related to this for the column for the Rapidian, the interfaith ethics column. When people make decisions about what they eat and what they don't eat, there's two components. One is the health component, right? Maybe, sometimes we don't take that component as seriously as we should, but we choose certain things to eat based upon the effect that it has on our physical bodies. And this is not really from the religious standpoint. That's left open to the people to decide based upon what's available to them and the temperament of their own bodies, what food is best and healthy for them. But then also there's a moral component about what we eat, right? It's a part of our ethics, right? Any culture, in American culture, there's certain foods that people don't think you should eat, or it's seen as strange for people to eat, that might be eaten in some other Eastern cultures. And if you ask the people, why is it that you don't eat this certain food? It's hard to give a real clear answer about why this animal is okay to eat and why this one is not. And some people might try to find a health basis for it, but usually from the health standpoint, it's not very, very clear that there's a big difference in health-wise. But there's a certain moral feeling that there's something wrong about eating a certain type of animal, for example. So this comes to a bigger question of the basis for morality itself, right? The same question of why is it okay to eat this and not eat this can be asked about any other issue in your life. Why is this okay and this is not okay. And for anybody that studied philosophy and ethics, if you take an absolutist theist position, right, that these are rules that came from God, it's much more simpler. But for people who don't take that position, it's very tricky to find a firm philosophical basis for what is right and what is wrong. So obviously, from the Islamic standpoint, we are theists, and we believe that God has given rules for the people to follow. So these rules about what we're allowed to eat and not allowed to eat come ultimately from God. But then we can ask the question, okay, it's from God, but why did God say this, eat this and not that? And so in Islamic theology, there's been 3 schools of thought about morality in general, not only about food, but in all questions of morality, what's allowed for the human being and not allowed. One is that good and evil, right and wrong, are intrinsic values of things in the world. They exist in the world. Things were created as good and as bad. And the human being, through their intellect, has the ability on their own, even without revelation, to understand what's right and what's wrong. And this is actually a minority opinion by a group of more philosophical-minded theologians in early Islamic history that came about and then died out after that. It is considered a non-orthodox opinion, that the human being, just through intellect, without the need of revelation, can know what's right and what's wrong. The second school of thought is that right and wrong simply has no other meaning that Allah ordered this and prohibited this. God said do this, and God said don't do this. So that they're not intrinsic values of things in the world. Whatever is right and whatever is wrong is not something that exists in that action itself, above and beyond the fact that God said don't do this and don't do that. And if he wanted to, he could have done the opposite. Ordered us to do the things that we think are wrong now, and told us not to do the things that we think are right, and then those things would be right and those things would be right. And then there's a third school of thought, which is a little bit in the middle. That God created the world with things having intrinsic value of right and wrong, good and bad, but the human intellect is not strong enough to get it right on its own every time. So we need revelation from God. We need scripture from God to tell us what's right and wrong, even though we can understand it somewhat from our minds and our reflection on life and the world, but we can make a lot of mistakes about it too. So the ultimate guide to what's allowed and what's not allowed is the scripture, and our own human reasoning can never be put above and beyond what we find in the scripture. And so this is the perspective that we take when it comes to dietary laws, just like we do in every other laws and part of our life. That there's certain things that God has told us that these are good for you to eat, and certain things he's told us not to. And there's a verse in the Quran where it says that the Prophet, he makes the pure things allowable for you and makes the harmful or filthy things not allowed. So there's an understanding that it's not arbitrary, that the things that are allowed, they have good beneficial qualities, not just from a material perspective, but from a spiritual perspective, a metaphysical perspective, and that the things that aren't allowed, they have a metaphysical harm on the human being. And then there's an idea of ritual impurity, spiritual impurity, right? Similar to in Orthodox Judaism and Islam, we have an understanding that there's certain things in the world that are ritually impure, and they affect your worship, for example. So there's certain substances. One, for example, is blood. That if you have it on your body or on the place of prayer at the time of performing your prayer, that will render your prayer invalid because it's something that's spiritually unclean. And so it affects you at a metaphysical level in your ability to achieve a certain spiritual state. And so many of the foods that we don't eat, they also have that quality of being ritually impure. Not only do we not eat them, but even it's the substance, the material of itself is considered metaphysically harmful to the human being in their spiritual. So now what is it that we're not allowed to eat, and what is it that we are allowed? So we have two areas of prohibition when it comes to things that you put into your body. Number one is intoxicants. Anything that's intoxicating is not allowed in Islam, right? At the forefront being alcohol, and alcohol is seen also not only as not allowed because it's intoxicating, but as spiritually, ritually impure, right? So that if you get it on your body, you can't pray in that state. It's something that's seen as, it has an intrinsic quality in its nature that it's harmful spiritually, not only being ingested, but just in and of itself as a substance. And so that's fairly clear, right? Anything that intoxicates takes us out of our completely present frame of mind. The second thing pertains to animals, right? So anything that's not an animal or is not intoxicating is allowed, right? All types of vegetables and fruits and grains and things. There's not any restrictions about these things. The restrictions come when it comes to animals. So first, we have restrictions about what types of animals are allowed to eat. So there's at least one that everybody knows, right? What is the animal that Muslims don't eat? Pork, right? But it's not just pork that we're not allowed to eat. Any mammal that is a carnivore, that's a predator, we're not allowed to eat, right? So just like we don't eat pork, we also don't eat bears or lions or tigers or whatever it may be. And even one opinion about why is pork emphasized so much is because there was a confusion because it eats other animals. It doesn't attack and doesn't hunt, right? But it will eat dead animals if it finds them. But it also eats plants and vegetables. So one of the opinions about why pork is not allowed or why pork was emphasized because there was a confusion about it. Which category does it fall into? Things that eat plants or not. So for land animals and also for birds, we don't eat anything that hunts and kills other animals. When it comes to sea creatures, it's much more easy. There's a little bit of difference amongst the scholars, but generally it's understood that all sea creatures are allowed to eat. So generally we eat grazing mammals, right? Like cows, goats, sheep, even camels. Then after we pass the test of is the animal itself something that's allowed to eat, then how did the animal die? For the animal to be allowed to eat, it has to be slaughtered in a certain fashion. It can't die accidentally. It can't die by being killed by another animal. It can't die from falling from a high place. It can't die from being struck by a hard object in the head. It has to die by having its main artery cut such that the blood flows out from the body and drains at the time that it's slaughtered. Because that blood that flows forth from a wound is considered spiritually impure. And it has to be drained from the body before you can eat from the animal. So the animal has to be killed in the right way, right? So in modern day slaughtering, for example, the most, it's not a very nice topic to talk about while we're having food, but most animals are killed by a device that strikes them in the head like a bullet, right? And then if anybody's seen No Country for Old Men, the guy in that movie uses one of those to attack people. But so this type of food is not allowed, right? Because it's killed by a blow to the head instead of having the vein cut in a way that the blood flows forth. And all of this is very similar to kosher law in the Jewish tradition as well. Then also, who is it that performed the act of slaughtering? The person who performed the act of slaughtering has to be either a Muslim or a Jew or a Christian, right? Somebody from the Abrahamic tradition. And then another thing, there's a little bit difference of opinion about, but the majority said that also the name of God, a prayer has to be mentioned at the time that it's killed. So all of this shows there's a very metaphysical quality about it. The same animal itself, if you said something when you killed it, it's allowed to eat and it's pure, but if you didn't say the prayer when you killed it, now it's considered to be spiritually impure and it's something that you can't go near at all. So there's this connection between the outward realities of these things and a certain metaphysical, spiritual reality of these foods. And those are the main things, right? That it has to be the right type of animal, slaughtered in the right way, slaughtered by the right type of person, and to have a prayer made at the time that it was killed. And then we can, if anybody has any questions, we can take them when we have the question and answer it.
Thank you, Imam Kip. Now we're on to dessert. So dessert is, it's a sweet called Ghulam Jab. Oh, I tried to butcher that name. I said it all day. I'm so sorry. But so there is a vegan option and there's the non-vegan option. For the vegan, it looks weird, but I promise you, it's okay. It's fine. I promise you. I had to say that. I was forced to say that statement, so I'm sorry. It's not my choice. But everyone is, I'm not gonna call you up by table. Everyone grab one. They're pretty big, so one like this, and it's dunked in sugar, literally.
I know it. Gulab Jam.
Yeah. So speakers will go up first, of course. The vegan option is in the orange tin, right? Right? Yeah, it's in the orange one, and then the non-vegan is in the yellow. So if you are vegan, feel free to grab from the orange tin. And then if there's leftovers, first come, first serve, you guys. I don't know what to tell you. But speakers go ahead, and then once they can take, everyone is free to climb. And then there's also, you guys can throw your plates if you don't want to like cross-contaminate or whatever. The trashes are in the back. New plates are present. Yeah, and then we're gonna have our last speaker, Hamsu, speak. So you guys are dismissed to go get some dessert.
First time I had one of these was at a Krishna temple. You got referred to them as Krishna bullets. That is not bad. I don't always eat these because sometimes they can just be so sweet. No, this is okay.
Black coffee would be very good.
It's hard to eat more than a small amount. Yeah, that's the.
Chickens are killed the same way as cattle.
Yeah, so usually,
Right.
I can't see anything.
I
I feel like that was not that bad. I was really not that bad.
And so the fact that you focus on eating vegetarian animals.
So even in the ocean, restrictions.
How about the chickens eating insects? That's okay?
It's a predator.
No, I guess you're wrong. Yeah, I guess you're wrong. I think it's also because I actually tried it. No, I think
It's a little complicated too, because there's things like food and mention. Scholars and extended.
That was like the phase, like Fiji water.
Yeah. Once you get it
Right.
so it is in one school, but then other. The majority of these are examples of
Well, there weren't a lot of bears in there.
So they help in a way. I think that like in the beginning of the semester, they're and at the end of the semester.
Really?
You have to be more controversial. That's why they're very fast. And we have lots of stereotypes to
I can do that. Give me a week.
Oh, yeah, usually.
What's it? Yes.
That's great.
Yeah.
And just told me that he's getting like tons of Calvin classrooms. How come I'm not getting any?
Our advisor teaches English.
And the Hindu and non.
Okay. Yes. Okay, all right. I just didn't want to get left out. Okay, okay. Thank
There was
you.
a class, I promise.
Okay. All right.
I'm actually speaking in that class tomorrow, so.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, student, yeah.
Okay. He said, we just need to become more controversial. I can do that. Just give me a week.
I really believe in so fast.
Oh, you don't know me. So, okay, that's, thank you.
Yes, yes. Okay, people who want more can get more. The big ones are in the bottom. I did not lie, okay? They're just in the bottom, okay? Not my fault, I'm sorry. But first come, first serve. Go ahead. When I was there, it was so big, and then when we finished them,
I'm impressed that you guys made it.
I know we spent all day yesterday.
What is the main ingredient? Is it corn or wheat?
We made a pre-packaged flour that had everything in it. I don't have it. My friend Erin does. I'll probably tell you what's in it.
It's wheat, I would think. It could be.
It tasted more like wheat.
Yeah.
Sorry, guys, I can't tell you.
Oh. I'm so sorry. I just put that on the social legality. But everybody calls it Is that what I had said?
My dad's actually right there. Yeah. I'll talk to you after he goes to my
I was wondering where your family was when you seen them.
Yeah,
They're here.
they're here. And then that's my family right there. My two cousins and my brother and my Yes.
You were born in Grand Rapids?
Yes. Me and all
I was born in North Carolina. It's where the Chinese are. I am now the student teacher, so I've asked the teachers and staff to design a things Western City. I don't know the red one, I just want the yellow. The saffron back. We're not planning on Indian or West Michigan, so let's design a West Michigan. I'm pretty fine. I was wearing this, I stopped wearing it for a while, and I was told by my son that please wear it. The biggest thing was it represents the teaching and you know obviously about it.
Yes. No, I know, I totally get that.
So they want me. That's the seeds of it. Like music. Yeah, so I think like Madam Butterfly.
And what do you wear for, prayer? I mean, public, in the
Yeah, I mean, it just depends, like on a day-to-day basis, I'll just wear. Sometimes I'll wear
You know, they're wrong.
but sometimes I'll wear. So lots of times I'll wear. Because I don't have any.
I know. I look really good.
Our big converts.
I'm going with really, I think a lot of our schools.
You know, schools
Okay, everyone, we're gonna have our last final speaker. And I'm gonna give it to our intern, Arzu.
Hello, I'm Arzu. I'm a new intern here at Calvin Interfaith Alliance. I'm a communications intern, and I will be introducing our next speaker, Hung Soo. He was born and raised in Michigan, formerly a Roman Catholic. He is now a Mahayana Buddhist. He took precepts at the Banhan Temple in Lansing under the precept master Jack Lawler of the Lambda Dhyana School. After learning from several different teachers, he's now a senior teacher at the Grand Rapids Buddhist Temple, which he's been teaching since 2013. Additionally, he teaches Buddha Dharma, he shares Dharma talks, and he's involved in the Calvin interfaith community. And he also guides sutra classes and guides group studies as well. Thank you so much for coming.
Am I holding this close enough? First off, thank you for having us here. I wanted to explain, I did bring something for the show and tell temple table. There's a golden statue of a woman. In Chinese, her name would be Quan Shi Yin. She is the bodhisattva, or in English, but let's say the personification of compassion. She's not something that we worship. She's something that is representative to us, just as Americans don't worship the Statue of Liberty, but she represents something. Quan Shi Yin represents compassion. And if you look at her, she has 1,000 arms. That's because she is teaching us, she is showing us with 1,000 arms that there are countless ways to show compassion. There are countless ways to be compassionate. There's untold ways to be kind and gentle. Taking a cue from my colleagues here, I will describe a little bit of the history of my tradition.
Buddhism started with a man named Siddhartha Gautama. He was born in the area of what is now the border of India and Nepal, northeast India. He was born in what we would call as a prince, perhaps. His father was a very wealthy ruler. He had anything he wanted. Any desire he had was answered. He was raised as a member of a solar religion. They worshiped the sun, plus local deities. He was also trained in the Vedic scripture. And the Vedas are foundational to the Hindu tradition. So he had a very strong foundation in the current philosophies and traditions of the time. He grew unhappy and questioned many things. We are offering prayers, we are offering sacrifices, we are following regulations, and yet there's still greed, there's still war, there's still theft, there's still lying. Why is all this? He left his family and went out to search for answers. And after years of study, years on his own, he found some answers, the answers he was looking for, the answers that he used to share with others and which grew into the religion of Buddhism. During this time, he did something which is not unique. Many religions find that the body is the problem. Our body wants to be comforted. It wants to be warm. It wants to be safe. It wants to have good food. It wants to listen to fine music. And so in India at that time, as today, and in many places else, people thought if they could control the body, they could control their relationship with the truth, the divine, whatever you want to call the ultimate. He did that so well that he came close to starving himself. He told his students later on that he was living on one rice or one bean a day. And he almost died of starvation until a young girl on her way to a shrine with an offering of rice gruel, rice pudding, stopped and helped him and fed him. Now the Buddha and Buddhism itself, well, Buddhism itself has created a religion. The Buddha did not give us rules and regulations that we had to follow. The tradition that has grown up after him, of course, we as human beings love rules and regulations. But the Buddha, what he did was point out choices. We have choices. And our future is dependent upon those choices. If we make a wholesome choice, chances are we'll have a wholesome result. If we make an unwholesome choice, chances are it will be an unwholesome result. So he taught that we are what we do. We are what we say. We are what we think. The only thing we own is our actions. We are the heirs of our actions. How we act, how we think, how we speak is the creation of ourselves. That's how we create ourselves. Now, the Buddha never told his students that they could eat something or they could not eat something. The Buddha said that it doesn't matter what you put in your mouth. What matters is what comes out of your mouth. The words you say, if you tell the truth or if you lie, if you use the truth to hurt somebody, if you spread gossip, if you spread innuendo. Now, the Buddha founded a monastic tradition, and that is how his religion, his teachings lasted and how they spread. Now, to the monastic community, he did give specific regulations. He told them every day the monks would go out once a day and beg for food. And he told them they would eat whatever someone put in that their begging bowl. The only time they were not to eat meat, because most people think that Buddhists are vegetarians, and many Buddhists are. But the Buddha said, if someone puts meat in your bowl, you eat it, unless you know that that animal was killed specifically for you. That's the only time you refuse it, because that animal has now lost its life because of you. Now, as I said, many Buddhists are vegetarians, but there are some who are not. And usually those who are not for very specific reasons. Let's take Tibet, for example. Tibet is a country of high altitude. Not very much grows there. Grasses and sedges and herbs will grow there, which feed goats and yaks, sheep. And so most of the diet, pre-modern diet, was these animals plus the products that make from their milk. Butter is extremely important in the Tibetan diet. I don't know much about Nepal, but I would think that would be similar, many similar things there. But to stress, and I myself am a vegetarian to a degree, which is an odd thing to say, but if you were to invite me to your home for dinner and serve me a cheeseburger, I would eat that cheeseburger out of respect for my host. I would not refuse it unless you had killed the cow, specifically because I was coming over. I would think most of you don't have cows to kill, so I wouldn't worry about that. But it is specific to our teaching that we are not so much concerned with what we eat, but with what we say and what we think and what we do. That is the most important part. At the temple, because of COVID, we haven't had a potluck for a very long time. They are going to be coming back sometime this summer, and our temple is made up of people from all over the world, so our potlucks are some spectacular meals. And they're always vegetarian, and many of them are vegan, simply because that is what most Buddhists are attempting to do. And as I say, there are many people, even in the West here, who are Buddhist but not vegetarian. I do believe, and the Buddha never ordered or never commanded anybody what to eat, anybody outside the monastic community. I do believe, though, from my studies, from my practice, from my experience of the teaching, that a vegetarian and even a vegan diet is where the tradition is leading mankind, humankind. That is where we are being guided to. The Buddha once said, nobody wants to feel pain, nobody wants to be hurt, nobody wants to die. And I can extrapolate that out to animals. No animal is going to crawl up on my plate and say, eat me. I grew up on a farm, and when you go to butcher an animal, they do not want to die. They will do their best to get away. And it can be heartbreaking. As a child, I learned never name an animal, never give a name to a farm animal, because then the day will come when you may have to slaughter. I raised ducks today in the city of Grand Rapids because there's no regulation against ducks. There are regulations against chickens, but none against ducks. So I raised ducks, and the only thing we do with them is eat their eggs. Some of my neighbors are surprised that we don't eat the ducks, but that would be like eating your German Shepherd or your Cocker Spaniel. It's a member of the family. And that is what the teaching of the Buddha is asking us to do, to observe all life as one. There's a saying by Buddhist philosopher that says, enlightenment is when a wave realizes that it is the ocean. What does that mean? I and you are a wave, and we're a wave on the ocean of life. All things are an expression of that life. The Buddha once said that you have been everybody's mother, you have been everybody's father, you have been everybody's brother, you have been everybody's sister, you have been everybody's lover, husband and wife through our past existences. Because in Buddhism, we don't teach reincarnation, we teach rebirth. The energy that keeps this body alive will be reborn, just as the minerals and the moisture in this body will be recycled in the universe. So understanding that I am a wave, and this cow is a wave, and this dog is a wave, because dogs are eaten in certain places. We are asked by the Buddha to respect and protect life, simply because we are all part of that life. And I think I'm finished.
Can we give a round of applause to all of our speakers? I am so happy and I'm so grateful that everyone's here and that we have these wonderful speakers, each of them speaking about their own faith background. And we get to all learn about community, diversity, open-mindedness, and it's amazing. Now we're gonna open up the floor for questions. You can do them anonymous, you can raise your hands. If you choose to do it anonymous, you can email your question to cia@calvin.edu, and then our communication director, Delaney, will be able to tell us what your questions are. So go ahead.
Reminder, we are recording, so if you do really prefer to just have your question asked anonymously or not in the recording, please send it to the email.
So I'll just give you guys like a minute unless someone already has a question. Like, raise their hand.
Can I like ask my question just right here?
Yeah, no,
Okay,
yeah,
okay.
sorry.
Okay, so, Mr. Su, could you tell me that, what's your denomination of Buddhism?
Mahayana.
Okay, thank you. And another question. So could you tell me that, is your name like your original name?
No, it's not my birth name. When I was ordained, I was given that name.
I see. Thank you.
And this is a safe place, safe space, I should say. It's a safe space where everyone's questions are acknowledged and are genuine.
Hopefully a safe place to.
Yeah, that's safe.
I found it interesting that most of you, I believe, converted from one religion to another. What maybe were some of the things that motivated you to leave your religious tradition to try a new one?
Anyone can start.
Yeah.
Do I need a mic for this?
Yes.
This is a safe place, and I don't wish to denigrate anybody or anything. I just found that I was raised as a Roman Catholic, and after a while, I found I wasn't comfortable with the beliefs. And I went looking, and actually the first religion I found was Taoism. And I tried to find a Taoist community, and there was none. I did find a Buddhist meditation group, and I'm glad I did.
I would say pretty much what Hung Soo just said, that it's all about being able to have a belief system that resonates with everything. It resonates with your sense of logic, resonates with your sense of experience, and that I did not have. I often think about it this way. Imagine that you're listening to the radio and you hear a weather report, and the weather report says it's going to rain, and you take it at face value. Okay, it's going to rain. And then later on, you look at the sky and you say, well, it sure doesn't look like it's going to rain. But then again, this is West Michigan, and so, anything can happen. It could snow in July, maybe. But then you get another weather report from a different station, and it says that it's not going to rain. Okay, wait a minute here. It's going to rain, and I'm having a hard time believing it's going to rain, but that radio station certainly is an authority, so I really should pay attention to it. But then again, this other radio station says that it isn't going to rain. And I'm looking up in the sky, and it seems like it's not going to rain. It's as simple as that, in that after serious study, I am a product of 16 years of Roman Catholic education. Hold your applause. And it's interesting, when I was 13, I started questioning the most important dogmas, not of Catholicism, but of Christianity. I loved my culture though, right? I'm Italian American, and Italians and Catholic, I mean, they go together like this. When you're raised in a house where breads are named after saints, it's just, and so I love being a part of the culture, and I never for a moment thought that, well, I'm just going to stop going to church. I'm going to ask mom and dad to take me out of my Catholic school. Nothing like that whatsoever. I continued, let's see, that was 13, so I was in 8th grade. I definitely wanted to go to a Catholic high school, and I ended up going to a Catholic college. So go figure. Even though I did not believe in the important dogmas, I was profoundly influenced by the life of Jesus. I never stopped reading Christian literature. But then it was in my sophomore year, I took a comparative religion, sophomore high school, took my comparative religions course, and when we studied Hinduism, and I loved all of the faiths that we studied, but when it came to Hinduism, little bells rang, and I go, I'm drawn to this, I think. So I took a self-directed tour. This is Detroit, 1970, where there was only one Hindu temple. Now there's a gazillion. But back then there was only one close to downtown. And I went there. And again, something drew me. I'll admit, being 15, part of it was the exotica. The women in saris, the music that was played, the colors, the altars that were so vibrant with color. And then I have to admit that after this service, it was on a Sunday evening, and so we had a lecture, which impressed me. We had chanting, and then they served a dinner. And I'd never had Indian food before. Now to say I converted for the food would be a slight exaggeration. I always said if ever I cut a commercial for Hinduism, the tagline would be, Hinduism, come for enlightenment, but stay for dinner. No, obviously I didn't convert. because of the food, but I really did enjoy that dinner. It took me a long time to move from Catholic, and believe me, even though I abandoned some of the most important tenets of Catholicism and Christianity, I still called myself a Catholic for years. It took me from the time I was 15 till I think 32 or 33 before I actually formally embraced the Dharma, as we say. I don't commit easily to anything. I was 40 when I walked down the aisle, asked my wife about her commitment. But once I do, I'm there, I'm solid. And so I've been practicing for about 35 years now. So there you go.
So for me, I didn't grow up in a very religion-focused family, right? Like a lot of people, I grew up that, maybe you would go to church on Christmas or Easter or something like that, or especially if I'm visiting my grandma, right? But as far as like my mom and my dad, religion was not something that was really ever talked about. But I always had a belief in God. And in Islam, we have an idea of a concept that we call the fitrah, or the original nature of the human being. The human being is born with a kind of innate longing for the Creator and a kind of understanding that he has a Creator who he should make it his goal, a life to worship, and that through the distractions of the world, we forget about that. But that the human being, it's almost the opposite of original sin. We have this concept that the human being is born good, and then it's the world that messes them up. So I always had that idea of believing in God, and even an appreciation for the sacred. Ever since I was a little kid, even when I would hear somebody, as they say, take the Lord's name in vain, it would bother me. Like I could feel a physical feeling, like, oh, I can't believe somebody used the name of God like that, even but not being in a religious environment at all. Then in elementary school, the last 2 years of elementary school, 4th and 5th grade, I had my best friend at that time was from Afghanistan. And so through his family, I got exposed to Islam, where they just talked about Islam in a very simple way, about that we believe in God, we believe in prophets, and then a little bit about the idea of God, one God who has all of the attributes of perfection and is completely different from his creation. And that really resonated with me and was like, well, yeah, that's what the idea I had in my mind of God already. So my parents divorced when I was young, and so after I was living with my mom at this period of time, then I went to live with my dad in Montgomery, Alabama, which is, as they say, the Bible Belt. Right? And my dad remarried to a woman from a strict Southern Baptist family, and so after 12 years of being raised with a father that I never heard mention God once, started saying we're going to church every Sunday and every Wednesday night and all of this, because the in-laws say we have to do it. And so then I started to get exposed to Christianity more, and I wasn't really comparing theologies that much. Mostly I was just thinking I don't really want to be here, I want to be hanging out with my friends. But I would compare a little bit between what I was hearing there and what I had learned from my friend from Afghanistan before, and always seemed a much more clear, straightforward picture to me and resonated with my intuition about God. So fast forward, I know I try to keep it as quick as possible. I stopped thinking about religion completely. And then in my early 20s, one day, I've lost touch with that friend from a long time ago. And I see a documentary about Afghanistan. And it reminded me about that friend that I had before. And later that day, I was going to the bookstore looking for something to read. And I said, well, why don't I pick up a book about Afghanistan or the Middle East or Islam or something like that, purely just out of the next thing to read out of intellectual curiosity. And so I think at that time I got a book just about the history of that region of the world, but it talked a lot about Islam in it. And I said, well, maybe next it'll be interesting to read something more specifically just about the religion. And then I got a book about Islam, and I said, well, this kind of caught my attention. Let me get another book and another. And then I got to the point where I said, wow, I believe this. This is true. Everything that I've read has told me that it's true. So I didn't say, look, I need guidance in my life. Let me go find a religion that works for me. I just said, just reading stuff just to pass the time, right? This is before iPhones and YouTube and scrolling and stuff. So we used to read books in those days. But then it got to the point where I was intellectually convinced, even against my own will. Such that it got to the point that right before I converted, I said, I know this is true, but no, I'm not going to convert this. That's a big step, and I have to change what I eat, change the way I live my life, so many things. People are going to think I'm strange. There's no way I'm going to do it. And then immediately when I heard that thought, it came to my mind, that's the worst possible state somebody could be in when they meet God. I say, I knew it was true, but it was too hard, so I turned my back. Right? And so then at that moment, that's when I made my decision to accept this.
Any other questions?
Yep. You mentioned, if I remember correctly, that Muslims had to be aware of the way that the animals they ate were slaughtered. So what does this mean for a Muslim in the supermarket? Are they able to buy meat there?
Right, so we call food that's been killed in the right way halal, right? It's like the word kosher in the Islamic tradition. And so now it's a little bit complicated because in the Quran it says you're allowed to eat the food of the people of the book, right? The food of Jews and Christians. And what that means is, like I said, food that was slaughtered by Muslim or Jew or a Christian, along with all of the other things in place. Now, some people have taken that verse from the Quran and said, oh, well, if it's food killed by a Jew or a Christian, then it doesn't matter how it was slaughtered or anything else, but that's not really a sound interpretation of the meaning of the Quran. So some Muslims will just eat any meat from the supermarket and say, well, it's meat of Jews and Christians. But really, the more true to all of the evidences in the Quran and the practice of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, is that the meat that you would normally get in the supermarket would not fit the qualifications of what a Muslim is allowed to eat. But at Walmart on 28th Street, they do have chicken that's certified halal. And also kosher is allowed for us because it meets those requirements of being the right type of animal and a prayer being said at the time it was killed by a Jewish person and slaughtered in the right way, right? So we can eat kosher food as well. And then we have special markets that specialize in meats that are halal, killed in the right way. So when it comes to like grocery shopping, it's not a big problem. Whereas the problem is eating out at restaurants, right? That's where it becomes a challenge. Even especially when I said that the idea that the food becomes physically impure. So even, if you get you go to a place and you order something that's vegetarian, but it's fried. Most likely they fry it in the same oil that they fried, whatever meat things that they have there. So when it comes to eating out of restaurants, it can be a little bit tricky. But that's why it's nice that veganism has become so popular these days, because now almost anywhere you can go, you can find a vegan option.
What are some of the hardships that you face when converting to this religion? I mean, each of your religions respectively.
I'm sorry, I missed the first half. What?
No, so what his question was, when you guys converted, what were your guys' hardships? Like family, friends, like how was it when changing your entire lifestyle? What were some of the
I
hardships?
see. Okay.
There were really no problems. If you were to see me in a bathing suit, you would see tattoos all over my body. I was not born a Buddhist teacher. When I decided to study and practice and change my tradition, my father was dead by then, but my mother and my aunts were alive, and they were pleased that I was settling down, that I was finding a moral center. So there was really no problem for me.
Yeah, okay, when I was 15, my parents found out that I'd been going to the temple. Little freaked out. Because they had no idea. They had no idea in the world what this thing is, right? People did not know about Hinduism. And so, they gave me a good talking to. Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. And I just went underground. And I just sneak out to the temple as whenever I could. I didn't do drugs, so I had to do something to bump them. And so, yeah, that was how I lived my life for a little while. And then I became of age and I could drive. I didn't have to take the bus to the temple. And I didn't have to give an accounting of my whereabouts, when I'm 18, 19, 20 years old. But when I will say this is so interesting. When we had this conversation, I remember my mother referencing my cousin who lived with us for a time when he was going to college. And he went to the same Catholic college that I did, the University of Detroit. And she said, I remember when your cousin Frankie was in college and he took philosophy courses and that made him question, like, okay, he's taking philosophy courses at a Catholic college. So obviously they must find value. The college must find value in philosophy courses. And he's questioning, how is that a bad thing, right? And that always stuck with me, that would be the mentality, never question. But then, of course, as I mentioned, it was years later that I actually formally embraced. By that time, my father was also deceased. And my mother continued to live in Detroit. I was already here in Grand Rapids. And she would come up to visit, of course, from time to time. And I remember I invited her. I had a gig, something like this. I was giving a lecture somewhere. And all she cared about was the fact that I was at the podium. I was the speaker. That's my son. Oh, what does it feel to be like the mother of a Hindu? But he's my son, and he's speaking. He's an important person. And you know what? Here, another thing too, is that I invited her. At that time, we didn't have a temple. The temple's only about a dozen years old. At that time, we had ceremonies and lectures and all of that at people's homes. And I remember taking her when she was visiting to a couple of ceremonies at people's homes, and she fell in love with the Indian Hindu community. And she didn't mind the food either. So it never was an issue. The only time in my family where somebody was actually aggressive towards me because of the choice I made was a cousin of mine. We got into a conversation, and when I explained where I was spiritually, he really berated me and just said, you're a Catholic, you need to go back to the church, yada, yada, yada. Oh, that's right, he was insanely drunk at the time. And I, not wanting to argue, especially with a drunk, I just, after he went off on a tangent, I said, Jim, oops. Anonymous cousin, you've given me a lot to think about. I thank you. That was the end of it. We went to bed, and the next morning, I swear to you, I don't believe he remembered a thing. He was just, yeah, you'd have to know it. Other than that, no, it really has not been, I would certainly never call it a hardship. It's been just a blessing, and people, by and large, treat me just as fine as if I never converted. So, yeah, it's good.
Yeah, so for me, as I said, my family wasn't particularly religious family growing up. So when I converted to Islam, and my dad by that time was no longer married to the woman from a very strict Southern Baptist family. Maybe he didn't like having to go to church 3 times a week. I don't know. They were not upset about me changing my religion, but they were very confused, and especially maybe a little bit worried about what exactly it might mean to be converting to Islam because of things you see in the media, and especially the stereotype that sometimes might be true about the overzealous convert, right? That they might be the most likely people to get a wrong idea of a religion. But over time, they really grow to appreciate my practice of Islam when they saw the impact that it had on me and the change that it had on me. I as well, if I were to wear a bathing suit, you won't see me in a bathing suit, but you would see a few markings of my former life as well. And I guess you could say just in general, like I made a lot of trouble for my parents. And when I began practicing Islam, all of that changed, right? So much to the point that my mom, and especially my mom, really respects Islam a lot and has even told me about my younger siblings who are in high school now and now having their turn to give her a lot of trouble. Said, why don't you just take them to the mosque with you and please try to get them to convert to Islam. So this funny business out. So when in terms of dealing with the family, I had great support, which is especially for people converting to Islam. A lot of times it's not the case. Working as an imam, I know lots of people who have been told by their family members, if you're Muslim, you're no longer a part of this family, you're no longer allowed in this house, and these types of things. But I didn't have that experience at all. The difficulty maybe that I did face though was changing my lifestyle, leaving behind things that have become such a comfort and a part of my identity, right? Sometimes certain things about your life, they might not be very healthy for you, but you feel like that's who you are, right? You don't know who you would be if you cut those things out. So I would say that was a challenge and it was difficult, but it never felt more than you could bear. And we have a tradition in Islam that says when you give something up for God, He will always replace it for you with something better. And I have found that every single time without fault to be true. Every single time I've given something up for the sake of God, that God has put something better in my life to replace that. So it was a challenge, but a very rewarding challenge. Just like somebody when they're working out in the gym. It's a challenge to lift those weights, but they're standing there looking in the mirror the whole time, right? Appreciating the results that they're seeing. So I did, say had difficulty in the beginning, or still, the whole life is difficulty trying to be the best person that you can be, but it's very rewarding difficulty to struggle to try to please God the best that you can.
Is there any more questions? No? Okay. Okay, can we just thank our speakers one more time? Yeah, so thank you so much for coming tonight. If you want to grab some leftovers, go ahead and help yourselves. And I don't know. Oh yeah, tomorrow at 3:30 p.m. in the Alumni Board Association room in Commons Annex, Jeff Boss and I will, and maybe someone else, I don't know, will be on a panel talking about Muslim-Christian engagement. So if you're interested in that, come check it out. It'll mostly just be kind of a discussion. So yeah, that's all. Thank you all for coming. One more announcement. We do have our final Calvin Interfaith Alliance event with our Holy event. We are teaming up with SASA. You guys don't know who that is. South Asian Student Association. Did I say that right? Okay, yeah. Anyway, we're teaming up. We're gonna do something with Holy, which was last week. But hopefully we see you there, and hopefully it's outside where it's warm. But again, thank you all. Thank you, speakers, and thank you for coming.
Thank you for inviting inviting.
Yes, enjoyed listening
And I'm so glad you, my very flippant response to your email. I was, she invites me and my response was, oh, okay, good. Yes. Yes.
I got him at my house.
Yes. Interesting how that worked out. And I don't think it was the intention. But it's not, right? But you do have some really good, if you couldn't make it, I suspect the person who took your place would be good. I don't know about that, but.
Do we just try? Oh, good job.